I trusted my husband for 32 years. On my 58th birthday, he gave me a confession instead of a gift. Exactly 1 year later, he showed up at my door with flowers, begging me to take him back. But by then, I already had a suitcase packed and a one-way ticket to Rome. I remember the smell of that kitchen, lemon dish soap and the cake I'd baked for myself, because, well, nobody else thinks to do it after a while. I just pulled it out of the oven, vanilla, with that little wobble in the middle that means it's perfect. And I turned around, towel in my hands, smiling like an idiot. And there was Mark, standing in the doorway, not smiling. He said, "Diane, we need to talk." 4 words. That's all it takes, isn't it? 4 words and your whole life just tilts. Like the floor shifted 2 inches to the left and nobody bothered to tell you. Has that ever happened to you? One sentence and suddenly nothing in your life means what it meant 5 seconds ago? He told me he'd been seeing someone, a coworker, 26 years younger than me. He said her name like it was something delicate, something he didn't want to break by saying it too loud. Ashley. He said he wanted to start living again. Start living again. I'd been alive the whole time, Mark. I was standing right there, apron still on, cake still warm. I'm Diane. I'm from a small town outside Columbus, Ohio, and for 32 years I was somebody's wife. I packed his lunches, I ironed his shirts before every business trip, and there were a lot of trips. I drove our kids to soccer practice and dance recitals and dentist appointments while he was in Chicago or Denver or that one time Singapore. I never got a passport, never needed one, I figured. My whole world was that house, that kitchen, those kids, and I was happy. I want to be honest about that because this isn't some story where everything was terrible from day one. It wasn't. We had good years, real ones. I just didn't notice when they stopped. Looking back now, I can see the cracks. They were there for years. I just didn't want to look at them too closely. Like a hairline crack in a windshield, you tell yourself it won't spread if you just don't poke at it. There was the time, maybe 4 years before the birthday, when Mark started working late more often. 3 nights a week became 4, then 5. He'd come home smelling like a different cologne, not his, and when I asked, he laughed it off. Said it was from the elevator, from standing too close to someone in a crowded lobby. I believed him. Or maybe I just needed to believe him. There was the phone. He started taking it into the bathroom, into the garage. Once I picked it up off the counter just to silence a notification, and he came around the corner so fast he nearly knocked over a lamp. "Don't touch that," he said. Not angry, exactly, just sharp, like I'd reached into something that wasn't mine anymore. I remember asking Carol about it once, over coffee. Carol's been my best friend since we were 19. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "Diane, honey, when's the last time he looked at you like he used to?" I didn't have an answer. I changed the subject. There were small things, too. He stopped calling me Di, just Diane, all formal, like I was a coworker he was being polite to. He started going to the gym, which, fine, good for him. But then came the new clothes. Slimmer jeans, a haircut that took 10 years off him, at least in his head. I told myself it was a midlife thing. Men go through that. They buy motorcycles or grow a ponytail or start saying bro. I figured Mark's version was just protein shakes and skinny jeans. I never imagined it had a name, a face, a desk 3 doors down from his office. So there I was, 58 years old, standing in my kitchen with a cake nobody asked for, listening to my husband explain that he'd fallen in love with someone who probably wasn't even born when we got married. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything, though God knows I wanted to. I just sat down, right there on the kitchen floor because my legs stopped working, and I said, "Okay, that's it. Okay." He looked relieved, actually relieved, like he'd been bracing for a fight and instead got a clean exit. He moved out within 2 weeks, took the good suitcase, the leather one I'd bought him for our 20th anniversary, left me the one with the broken wheel. And here's the part I didn't find out until much later, the part that, when Carol finally told me, made my hands shake so bad I dropped my coffee mug. Mark hadn't just been seeing Ashley for a few months. He'd been planning this exit for almost 2 years. There was a folder, a literal folder, on a shared drive I didn't even know existed, labeled Transition. My future was a file folder, and I was the only person in the house who didn't have access to it. The weeks after that are kind of a blur, if I'm honest. I cried every night. Not pretty crying, the kind where you can't breathe right, where your chest feels like someone's sitting on it. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning reaching for him, forgetting for half a second, and then remembering all over again. Every single night, like the worst kind of déjà vu. My son, Tyler, came by a few times, but he had his own family, his own life in Cincinnati, and I could tell he didn't know what to say to me. My daughter, Megan, was worse. She actually defended her father for a while. He's been unhappy for years, Mom. Maybe you guys just grew apart. Grew apart. Like it was a mutual thing. Like I'd been growing apart from him too, instead of growing toward him every single day for 32 years while he was busy growing toward someone else. The house felt enormous, and silent in a way I'd never noticed before. I'd cooked dinner for two for so long that I kept making too much food, then standing in the kitchen at 6:30 with 2 plates, staring at the second one like it might fill itself. Money was its own kind of terror. I hadn't worked outside the home in decades, not because I couldn't, but because somewhere along the way, we decided it made more sense for me to manage the household while Mark's career had momentum. His words. I had no idea what our accounts even looked like. Turns out that's a very convenient kind of confusion for the person who left. The divorce papers came about 6 weeks after the birthday. Mark wanted to be fair, he said. Split everything down the middle. Fair. The man who'd been quietly building a life with someone else for who knows how long wanted to talk to me about fair. I signed them. What else was I going to do? But here's the thing nobody tells you about hitting rock bottom. It's also the only place where you can't fall any further. And that's exactly where Carol found me. Carol started coming by every other day. Sometimes she'd just sit with me while I stared at the wall. Other times she'd drag me out for walks, for coffee, for anything that wasn't sitting in that house with the silence. About 4 months in, she showed up with her laptop and a look on her face I knew well. It was the same look she'd had in college when she talked me into a road trip to Myrtle Beach with no plan and $40 between us. Carol sat down across from me, slid her laptop over, and said, "Before you say no, I need you to look at something first." On the screen was a photo, not of a cruise ship, of Mark at a restaurant downtown with Ashley. Taken 3 days ago, Carol's cousin worked there as a hostess and recognized him immediately. He looked happy, genuinely happy, in a way I hadn't seen in years. And that's when Carol said, "Now, do you want to go sit at home and think about that photo? Or do you want to come with me?" "I booked something," she said. "Booked what?" "A cruise?" I laughed. Actually laughed for the first time in months. "Carol, I am not going on a cruise." "It's a singles cruise." "Carol. For women our age, Diane. No husbands, no kids, no casseroles for the neighbors, just us and the ocean. And maybe a margarita with one of those little umbrellas." I said no about 100 times over the next 2 weeks. I had every excuse lined up: money, the dog, my sister's birthday, the fact that I hadn't worn a swimsuit in public since the Clinton administration. But Carol's stubborn. Always has been. And somewhere underneath all my nose there was this tiny scared voice that kept whispering, "What if? What if I went and it was awful and I came home and that was that? Or what if I went and for just a few days I remembered what it felt like to be a person instead of somebody's ex-wife?" I packed my bags the night before with my hands shaking. I kept thinking, this is ridiculous, I'm too old for this, what am I even doing? But I went. And before you ask, yes, I'm about to tell you about the worst dancing I have ever witnessed in my life. The ship was enormous, like a floating hotel, all white and gleaming, with the kind of buffet that makes you a little dizzy just looking at it. Carol and I had a cabin with a tiny balcony, and the first night, we just stood out there in the salt air, watching the lights of the port fade behind us, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Quiet, but not the bad kind. The kind where your own thoughts finally have room to breathe. The next morning, I put on a sundress I'd packed almost as a joke yellow, with little white flowers, the kind of thing a younger me would have worn. I looked in the mirror and almost changed. Almost. I didn't. At breakfast, this man, silver hair, kind eyes, reading glasses pushed up on his head, accidentally bumped my chair reaching for the coffee, and he apologized about 4 times and then he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, that's a beautiful dress." I hadn't been called beautiful in so long I'd forgotten what my face was supposed to do in response. I think I just stared at him. His name was Frank. Retired engineer from Michigan, widower, 2 grown kids, and the worst dance moves I have ever witnessed in my entire life, and trust me, by day 3, I had witnessed them on multiple occasions, because there was a live band every night and Frank apparently believed rhythm was optional. I'm not going to pretend it was some movie moment and all violins in slow motion. It wasn't. It was small. It was Frank saving me a seat at trivia night. It was both of us laughing so hard at the terrible karaoke that my cheeks hurt the next morning. It was him asking about my life, really asking, and then actually listening to the answer and realizing nobody had done that in years. Maybe ever, if I'm being completely honest. By the end of that cruise, something in me had shifted. Not fixed. I want to be clear. I wasn't fixed. I still cried some nights. I still missed the version of my life I thought I had. But for the first time since that birthday, I didn't feel invisible. When I got home, the house felt different. Smaller, somehow, in a good way. Like it could be mine now. Instead of just the place where my old life used to live, that's when I started writing. And it started small, just a blog-free website, ugly template, the works. I called it Starting Over at 58, which Carol said was very on the nose, Diane, but I didn't care. I wrote about the birthday, about the cake, about the cruise and Frank's terrible dancing and the sundress, about what it feels like to be erased from your own life and then, slowly, write yourself back in. I figured maybe 10 people would read it, mostly Carol probably, and maybe my cousin in Phoenix. Within a month I had thousands of followers. Women and some men, too, from all over the country, all with their own versions of my story. A husband who left after 20 years for someone from his office. A wife whose family stopped speaking to her after she finally said enough. People who'd been told their whole lives that their role was to support somebody else's dreams, and who'd woken up one day wondering where their own dreams had gone. I wrote about the loneliness, but also about the cruise and the dress and Frank's dancing, and slowly, without really meaning to, I became proof, for a lot of strangers, that 58 wasn't the end of anything. Now, I want to pause here, because what happened next is the part everyone always asks me about. People assume I went looking for this information, that I was checking up on him, scrolling through his life out of spite. I wasn't. I'd genuinely moved on. But small towns have a way of delivering exactly the information you didn't ask for, at exactly the moment you're ready to hear it. It came from the most unexpected source possible, Megan. My daughter. The same daughter who'd once told me they just grew apart. She showed up at my door one evening, sat down at my kitchen table, the same table, and said, "Mom, I need to tell you something about Dad, and I don't think you're going to believe it." Turns out Ashley wasn't quite as enamored with the established, successful older man once the company went through a round of layoffs, and Mark, despite all those years of momentum, was on the list. He'd been counting on a bonus that never came. The apartment they'd rented together, the trendy one, downtown, with the exposed brick he'd apparently always wanted, that lease didn't get renewed. And Ashley, from what I heard, found someone else. Someone closer to her own age, with significantly more hair and significantly fewer ex-wives. I'm not going to lie and say I felt nothing when I heard all that. There was a part of me, a small, petty part, and I'm allowed to have one that felt a flicker of something close to satisfaction. But mostly, honestly, I just felt nothing. Like hearing about weather in a city I used to live in, and exactly 1 year later to the day, there was a knock on my door. I knew before I even opened it who it was. Almost exactly a year after that birthday, the cake, the confession, all of it there was a knock at my door. I almost didn't recognize him at first. He'd lost weight, but not in the gym way, in the worried way. He was holding a bunch of flowers from the grocery store, the kind with the plastic wrapper that's always a little crooked, and he looked smaller, older than the man who'd stood in my kitchen doorway 12 months earlier. "Diane," he said, "can we talk?" Behind me, in the hallway, my suitcase was sitting by the door. Packed. I had a flight to Rome in 18 hours. Frank was meeting me at the airport. Mark's eyes drifted past me, caught the suitcase, and something in his face just fell. Like he'd been carrying a whole speech in his head and it had just slipped right out of his hands. "I made a mistake," he said. His voice cracked a little. "I know that now. I want to come home, Di. D." He hadn't called me that in years. I looked at the flowers. Carnations, mostly. Probably $9 at the grocery store down the road, the same one where, a year ago, I used to buy ingredients for dinners I made for two. I thought about the kitchen floor. The cake. Okay. The silence in that house for months afterward. I thought about the sundress and the salt air on that balcony, and Frank's terrible, wonderful dancing. "I'm really glad you came by, Mark," I said. And I meant it, strange as that sounds. "I hope things get better for you, I really do." "Diane, wait. I've got an early flight," I said. "I need to finish packing." He stood there a moment longer, flowers in hand, looking at me like he was waiting for the part where I changed my mind. I didn't. I closed the door, gently, not slammed it, gently. There's a difference. And somehow the gentle way felt more final. I stood there for a second, listening to his footsteps fade down the porch steps, and then I went back to my suitcase. Yellow sundress packed right on top. Some doors, once they close, don't open the same way again. And some people only realize what they had, right after someone else finally shows them what they were missing. I think about that birthday cake sometimes. How it sat there, going cold, while my whole life rearranged itself around me. Funny thing is, I still bake myself a cake every year, vanilla with the little wobble in the middle. This year, though, I'm having a slice of it in Rome. If you've ever had to rebuild your whole life from a kitchen floor, you already know it's possible. Tell me about it in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this one.